All right, you guys should be able to see the slides. All right. Well, yes, welcome everybody. My name is Danielle Wong. I'm the Behavioral Enrichment and Animal Welfare Coordinator here at the Phoenix Zoo. And basically, what that means is that I manage the enrichment programs as well as the animal well-being program. And when we're talking about animal well-being, we're talking about the state of being comfortable, healthy, and happy. And that's really at the core of what we do here at the Phoenix Zoo. So it's something I'm really excited to talk to you about today. The presentation, I'm going to be talking about these behavioral observations, and the volunteers, they really help with providing optimal animal well-being to all of our animals. I'm really excited about that. A little bit about me. I actually got my start as a volunteer in the zoo field. I started at an aquarium in the husbandry department. And then I worked my way up to doing internships at several facilities until I became a keeper. So my background is mainly in keeping. I've mainly worked with carnivores, and that's actually what brought me here to Phoenix. And then about 2 years ago, I took on this role as the Behavioral Enrichment and Animal Welfare Coordinator, and really enjoy my position. This position is great in the sense that it's a really collaborative role. So I get to work with all sorts of different departments, including volunteer groups. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, the Arizona Center for Nature Conservation, also known as the Phoenix Zoo, was founded in 1962, and we are a proud accredited member of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or AZA. And like many other facilities in our zoological community, we are a nonprofit organization. And as a nonprofit, we rely on admissions, we rely on concessions, memberships, donations, special events, and really our community's support for our daily operations. Our mission is the Arizona Center for Nature Conservation advances the stewardship and conservation of animals and their habitats while providing experiences that inspire people and motivate them to care for the natural world. Our conservation, education, animal care, and our volunteer programs all contribute to fulfilling our mission. So we have a pretty robust volunteer program here at the Phoenix Zoo, somewhere in the realm of around 475 volunteers, and that includes around 400 adult volunteers. And this year, we're actually bringing back our Zoo Teen program, which has about 75 teen volunteers as well. And we really do rely on our volunteers to help support and foster that mission. Here are a few examples of roles that our volunteers take on in general here at the zoo. So we have got engagement volunteers, we got events only volunteers, we've got volunteer keeper assistants or VKAs, we've got our wild side art gallery volunteer, and many more. All of our volunteers work in roles to assist with the guest engagement or those special events, our ranger staff on ground, our grounds quality, and the animal care staff as well. Our volunteers are truly the backbone of our zoo, and we're really grateful for their time and commitment to help contribute to our work. So that's a little bit about me and the Phoenix Zoo and our volunteer program. So today I wanted to share some information about behavioral observations and the capacity in which our volunteers assist with them here in Phoenix. In doing so, we'll discuss what behavioral observations are and how they're beneficial to our zoo. We will discuss the key groups involved in conducting these behavioral observations, and we will discuss the different roles that our volunteers can participate in to assist with these observations, as well as how these roles benefit our facility. So, what are behavioral observations? Behavioral observations are the recording of behavior by an observer to gain insight into how the subject interacts with their environment. These observations can take place in the wild or in a controlled setting, such as a zoo, an aquarium, or laboratories. We use behavioral observations to make informed decisions regarding the management of our animals, and we call that evidence based management. So, what that means is we're using science and data to demonstrate that our management practices are working or that they're not working. We follow husbandry recommendations and rely on our knowledgeable staff and the zoological community as a whole to provide the best care for our animals. But the zoo field has come a long way in our understanding of animals' needs and husbandry practices. And that progression of knowledge and understanding of best care practices has been achieved by research and trial and error, and then sharing what we learn. So, by learning and adapting from previous management strategies, we found higher success rates in reproduction, viability in offspring, managing groups of animals, veterinary medicine, and more. We are where we are now as an industry because of what we've learned from previous management strategies. So it's really important that we are taking that into account and using that evidence. And all that being said, it's important that we remember that what works for one animal won't necessarily work for another animal. So we have to make adjustments of our management to ensure that every individual is not just surviving, but that they are thriving. When we talk about behavioral observations at the Phoenix Zoo, we have a few ways in which we do them. So, the main stakeholder involved is going to be our animal care staff. And these staff are the individuals who are directly involved in the care for the animals, and they're therefore directly involved in the management decisions that depend on the observations being done. They will do the observations and they will make or suggest changes as needed. In addition to that, we have two volunteer groups who participate when we do observations as well. We have our behavioral observation team, or BOT, or BOT, sometimes they're called, which is a group that we're going to dive into. And then we also have our bot video review position, which is another volunteer position that we will be discussing today. The Behavioral Observation Team, or BOT or BOT, is a group of individuals dedicated to aiding our animal care staff in observing the animals at the Phoenix Zoo. And they provide information so staff can make the best management decisions possible. I really do love having this group at our facility. They've been really useful for us. And I know that our staff really enjoy them, and the volunteers also really enjoy being in this position as well. Now, I did not start BOT. BOT has been around for a long time. So BOT actually got their start in 1988 with the Cheetah Watch program. And Cheetah Watch was a study that brought together 20 dedicated volunteers for a 5-year breeding study, during that time, the first cheetah births occurred in 10 years. And that is an amazing contribution to our zoo, and it demonstrates how they are the cornerstone of our facility. Since then, BOT has been involved in numerous projects, from short-term observations to long-term studies, and I'm sure by this point they've probably observed majority of our taxa, or all the animals at our zoo. So they've gotten to learn a lot and be really ingrained into our history here. So to participate with BOT, we ask that our volunteers are out of their probationary period of volunteering, and they've completed their general volunteer training. And after that, they're able to join up with us We want to try to have as many volunteers as possible to aid in the work that we are doing. So we just ask that they get through that general volunteer training in that probationary period. When we have volunteers in this role, we look for good observation skills and an attention to detail. They need to have the ability to observe and describe animal behavior without interpretation. That's really important. And they need to have the ability to work independently or with others, and they need to be able to multitask. So, to keep up those skills and be able to contribute to our projects accurately and effectively, we ask that our BOT volunteers try to work a minimum of one shift per the observations that we present to them. And we'll kind of talk about those in a little bit. And we also ask that they try to do at least one ethogram per month, which we'll be talking about that further too. Um, and with this, that should allow for our volunteers to have flexibility in their time and how they're volunteering with us here at the zoo, but still allowing us to have accurate and effective data to work with. Now, if a volunteer is unable to fulfill their requirement, we just ask that they communicate with us so we're aware. We understand that this is a volunteer position. They are volunteering with us and dedicating their time. So we just ask for some communication with that. And that's all. So, when we are talking about the types of observations that BOT is conducting, we're really talking about three, we kind of break them down into three categories. So, we've got event driven observations, we've got research studies, and then we have our general ethograms. So, event driven observations. These are going to be observations that occur when staff are needed to observe for a specific situation. These ones tend to be shorter term, but they can extend depending on that situation. And typically, these are things when we're talking about an introduction of animals. But that could be broken down into a few different categories. So, we could be talking about when we have a brand new animal to the zoo, or when we've had animals moved to a new habitat, or we're opening a brand new habitat. Um, if we make habitat modifications and then we reintroduce the animal to the habitat, we need to make sure and see how they're responding to that new space. Um, when we have animals of the same species, also known as conspecifics, we want to ensure that we're seeing proper social behaviors between them. And so we have BOT assist with that. In our mixed species habitats, when we first do introductions, we want to ensure we're seeing appropriate behaviors there as well to make sure it's a safe environment for all. Then we also have a behavioral enrichment program that, again, I oversee. So we have a behavior-based enrichment program, and everything we offer to our animals is meant to be goal-oriented and effective in encouraging specific natural behaviors. A part of that BE program, we follow what we call the SPIDER framework, and the E in SPIDER stands for evaluating. And so when we evaluate BE, we're determining how effective this enrichment is at achieving the specific goals. So we can actually have BOT assist with that by doing behavioral enrichment assessments. And that's a really important part of our work with their specific behaviors that we're looking for. We also have wellness observations, and those are for when we have health concerns for an animal or we need to monitor them for a specific behavior. So they could be sick, older, or just an animal that we're looking to monitor more closely. We can have BOT help us with those as well. And like I said, these event-driven observations, they tend to be shorter term, but they can extend depending on the situations. Many of them can also be emergent situations. So they're last minute. We just ask our volunteers if they can join in, and so many of them are able just to drop what they're doing and come help us out, and we really appreciate that. So I just wanted to share some examples of event-driven observations that we've had BOT help us with since I've taken over this role. We've recently built a second ringtail habitat, which is attached to our original habitat. The new one is on the right in the picture. And after that, when we moved our male back into this new habitat, introducing him to this new space, BOT helped watch him just to make sure he wasn't getting into any trouble. So that's how they were able to help us out. We've also brought in 3 new Cape porcupines and introduced them to our existing Cape porcupine habitat, which is what's pictured here. And BOT was able to gather information on where they went in the habitat and at what time, which was valuable information for our keepers to use. We opened our brand new predator passage habitat about a year ago now, and this involved bringing in new animals, including hyenas, and a more leopard, and 2 female lions. We had a male lion previously at our facility, and so when we brought in the new females, that included introducing the females to their new habitat, their new night house, so basically their new home, as well as to our male. So BOT actually helped observe for positive and negative interactions when we were introducing our male babu to the females. And what's actually really fun about this observation is our breeding recommended female came into estrus when we were doing the introductions. And so now it turned into our BOT helping us watch for reproductive behaviors as well. So that was a fun one. We've also recently done work on our prairie dog habitat, and you can see the new gray wall in the back. That's what they were working on. And due to this habitat setup and the management, it meant that the work had to be done with the animals in the habitat. So BOT assisted with watching the animals during this construction, and so they were a super big help there as well. I mentioned when we introduce animals for breeding, we've introduced several different rhino hornbill pairs for breeding purposes, and BOT helped bird staff look at positive and negative behaviors there, alerting keepers if the birds needed to be separated for any reason based off of what they were told. And lastly, we've monitored our female Komodo dragon as she explored one of our habitats for the first time. She'd never been in this space previously, and the male who's typically in this space is a lot larger than her. So we felt like, well, maybe she could climb the trees a lot easier than he could. So we had BOT monitoring for behaviors like that and just making sure she wasn't getting into any trouble as well. The next type of project that we have BOT assist with is kind of more formalized projects. These are called research studies, and these observations can occur when we have specific questions we need assistance with answering. Right now, these are typically just internal projects for the zoo, but if this area, at one point it could be expanded and maybe it could be a little bigger than that, and this group would be able to help with those as well. So some of the internal projects that we've worked with BOT with is our Stingray Bay. So they actually helped us determining how our stingrays in Stingray Bay responded to the guests that come to interact with them. And our Stingray Bay is a paid experience that our guests can touch and or feed if they happen to buy our food cups. And they can come in and interact with the stingrays for a period of time. Our keepers had noticed periodic times where the rays were pulling away from the walls of the tank or not allowing any interactions, as well as some occurrences of spy hopping behavior, which is where they come up and out of the water, which is not a very typical behavior for this species, as well as some splashing. And we're not talking about normal splashing, we're talking about excessive splashing. Both of those behaviors could be indicative of stress in these animals. So we decided to look and see if there was an effect on ray location in the pool based on the time of day or the number of individuals present in the bay or the number of food cups purchased and fed during an interaction. So we did look at the number of feeding interactions or touch interactions occurring in instances of that spy hopping behavior or the splashing behavior to see which were affected by the time of day, number of individuals present in the bay, or the food cups purchased and the feeding interactions. So staff assumed as the number of guests increased and as the day went on, our rays would be pulling away from the wall. We would be getting less interactions and possibly even be engaging in more of those stress behaviors. But because of BOT, we were able to determine that the spy hopping behavior actually decreased. The rays spent more time closer to the guests and they would engage in more touch behaviors regardless if the number of food cups being sold. And that was happening as the day was going on and the number of guests increased. So, with BOT's assistance, we were able to see that with this observation, it demonstrated that our management practices that we currently have in place, the protocols we had on the number of individuals that could be in for a certain amount of time and all of that, we determined that those were appropriate. So, that was good for us to kind of confirm. We've also taken a closer look at our male Andean bear due to a behavior that was being seen. Our BOT volunteers stepped in to help us monitor a specific behavior and compare occurrences of that behavior and patterns of that behavior to management changes that our keepers were changing in order to determine any of those patterns or the cause of the behavior. And this project is actually still ongoing. It's something that we're still working with. So BOT is still out there collecting information on Mr. Augie here. The The last type of observation that BOT assists with is what we call a general ethogram. And for these, we're trying to collect information on how the animals are spending their time, and really just looking at kind of a broad view of what our animals are doing in their habitats. So we're not necessarily looking for anything specific, but just trying to gather almost like baseline information on them. So we have had volunteers assist us with collecting general behavioral data on our Amur leopard, who was one of those new additions to our predator passage habitat that opened last year. Amur leopards, this is a new species to our zoo. And due to how warm Phoenix is and our narrow windows for transports, he wasn't able to come until late October of last year, and that's actually right at the start of our busy season. So what we wanted to do was gauge what behaviors he was doing and how often, and we did end up actually changing some variables during the time that BOT was collecting information as well. And then this information was presented to the keepers. That data was presented to them to show how he's spending his time based on their management practices. So we really have appreciated BOT's help on that. And we're now coming back into our next busy season. So we'll see how that compares to last year's. We also have 2 jaguars that call the zoo home. We have one male and one female who they live right next to one another. And typically jaguars, like mini cats, are solitary. So they spend all their time on their own unless they come together for breeding. And while we do have a male and a female, we are not recommended to breed by the SSP. So we are not going to be putting them together or anything like that. So they actually live in separate habitats, but they have the ability to see, smell, and hear one another. And this setup is not atypical in a managed care setting like a zoo. Many facilities house multiple individuals of solitary species. Some other facilities will not house more than one, but like many others, we do have more than one. Um, and it made us interested to see if one individual's behavior had an impact on another individual's behavior. So we had BOT assist with collecting information to see how our animals were spending their time. And then our animal care staff could compare to see if there were any patterns between the individuals. This was a very complicated ethogram due to the visibility of the habitat here and that. Um, so it was very complicated, but our amazing volunteers, they stuck with it, and they actually helped us collect over 500 hours worth of data. So that was really good to see. Now, to help our volunteers conduct those observations, they do need some tools. So we have radios that all of our volunteers carry, which allow them to connect with one another or their volunteer coordinators. But for BOT, for some of our observations, we need them to directly connect with the keeper staff. So for that, sometimes BOT will be offered a what we call a larger radio, and that way they can connect zoo-wide. For some of our observations, binoculars might be beneficial to be able to see in farther habitats and or for identifying individuals. So that could be a tool that they use. And we haven't really used these since I took over, but stopwatches are something that historically BOT has used when it came to collecting interval data. And we'll talk about that in a second. But stopwatches could be a tool that you could use if you needed to. We will oftentimes use notebooks to pass on general information that doesn't need to be passed on right away. It could be for the next volunteer on what the previous volunteer saw so they knew what to look out for, or notes on things to make sure what they're looking out for, or the keepers could look at those notebooks as well. And lastly, we actually use an iPad. Really, it could be any tablet, but we use iPads so that we can access the Zoo Monitor program. Zoo Monitor is an app developed by the Lincoln Park Zoo that allows you to record behavioral data, visualize information, and then export that data for analysis. This app has been amazing to use. I've really enjoyed it. I think most of our volunteers really enjoy it as well. It's something that we're still working out the kinks. I myself am working out kinks because I'm learning how to create them and make them as simple as possible. And our volunteers are learning to use them. So we typically use this app when we're doing the research studies or the general ethogram observations with BOT, not really with those event-driven observations. It can be used across multiple devices, and the best part is it can be used offline. So by that I mean no internet, no Wi-Fi, which is a must for our facility because we don't have zoo-wide internet yet. So when we're out in the park, there's a lot of dead zones where we won't be able to connect anything, and so we're actually still able to collect information using this program, which is great. I was able to work with our IT department to acquire several iPads for the animal care staff and for our volunteers to be able to conduct observations. And we've got them in their protective cases and everything, so they should hold up and last us for a long time. The Zoo Monitor app is downloaded onto these devices, and BOT could go pick up an iPad and then go out to the area to collect data. The one important thing about this program is you do have to have Wi-Fi at some point because they have to be able to download updates onto this program to make sure that they have the most up-to-date observations on their device. And then also when they're done, they can upload the sessions to make sure that I can see the data on the back end. So Once they get their iPad and they go out into the zoo, they have access to see all the projects that they can work on and get started within those projects. And then once they go into the projects, it can look a little bit like this. So this is an example of our Amur leopard one. So we have the ability to define the individual and show who we're looking at. We have the ability to look at the behaviors that we want to specifically see. And again, this was a more general one. So we were looking at a variety of behaviors to see what he was doing. And then we can also add in a map to be able to give us more location information as well. And again, following that observation, they have to save it, and then that saves it to the device, and then they need to upload it so that I can see it on my end, and I end up pulling all the data into Excel and doing the data analysis that way. So that's been amazing for us and our volunteers. So it's been a really great program that we've instituted. To help us obtain accurate data when they're out there doing their observations, we need to ensure that we are acting as a professional observer. And by that, we mean one who is unseen, unheard, does not attract attention in any way, and does not interpret animal behavior. The observer needs to ensure that they're quiet, they're invisible to the animal while maintaining optimal visual and is not interacting with the animal in any way. And they need to maintain that position and that visual. So that doesn't mean they can't take breaks. It just means that if we need to take breaks, we just kind of do them in between observations. Usually, our ethograms are for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes so they can take breaks in between each observation that they do, or if they need a replacement, if we happen to need constant eyes, they can use the radio and contact us to give them a break. And oftentimes our observations are in front of our habitats, where our guests are able to see the observations occurring, and they'll see behaviors or they'll see the animal and they get curious. So it's very common for guests to ask questions and try and get some more information because a volunteer is right there. And if they can, our volunteers are able to answer short questions. But to ensure that we're getting accurate data, we do ask that, especially in those ethograms, they tell the guests, hey, I'm so sorry, I can't answer this question right at the moment, but I can in 10 minutes when I'm done with this observation. So that is something that they are told they are able to do to help us out with providing for our animals' well-being. Now, a part of being a professional observer includes not only interpreting the behavior that we see in our animals, but um, I should say it includes us not interpreting the behavior that we see in our animals. Sorry about that. So, for that, we're actually talking about anthropomorphism, and that is the attribution of human characteristics to animal behavior. So, the best way to think about this is through an example. So, an example of this is when we look at a human or a baby opening their mouth, and then a macaque opening their mouth. In the baby's case, they are yawning because they are tired. In the animal's case, they are doing this, what we call an exaggerated yawn. And it's with a full display of teeth. And this is actually considered a threat behavior, or it can be indicative of tension as well. So while these behaviors may seem similar, you may see this animal opening their mouth and think, oh, they're yawning, they must be tired. Um, it's clear to see how that misinterpretation of behavior can actually lead to inaccurate behavioral data being collected as well. So that's why we want to make sure that we're not attributing the human characteristics to that animal behavior. Now, that being said, it's natural for us to think about things like animal behavior from our perspective because that's how we relate to the animal. That's how we try to understand what they're doing, but we need to do our best to avoid it. So, We are all guilty of it, but how can we avoid it to not create biased data? Well, one way is when we talk about animal behavior, it's best to describe the behavior that's being seen, not our interpretation of the behavior. So instead of saying, well, he was scared by the noise, we can say, when the noise occurred, he flinched, he put his ears back. And this takes away that interpretation of the behavior, and it's purely just the observation. And also, when we do observations, we will create a list of behaviors with clear definitions, and we use that to collect data. If the definitions aren't clear, if there's a question of, if this behavior is considered this or not, it means that our definitions need to be clearer for us to be able to collect accurate data. Before we have our volunteers assist, we have to design our observation. And all behavioral observations start with a question, a specific question that we want to be answered. And maybe that's we want to know how much time an individual spends in a particular structure on the habitat, or how much time they engage in doing a specific behavior, or just a general look, how are they spending their time in general? Either way, we have something that we're looking for. And our questions will actually be centered around who and what. So, with that, we need to identify subjects, which are the animals, and the behaviors that we want to look for. So, we'll have specific subjects whom we're observing during the observations. It can be an individual, it can be multiple individuals that we're watching. It just depends on the question. And then if it is multiple individuals or an individual within a group, they need to be easily identifiable to the observer to make sure that we're able to collect accurate data. And then, based on the question that we have, we're then also going to determine what specific behaviors we're looking for. So, sometimes we're looking for a few behaviors, sometimes a larger number. The more behaviors, it can tend to be a little more complicated, as with the number of subjects. If that increases, it can tend to be a little more complicated. But whatever behaviors we decide to include, it's important that they're clearly defined and distinguishable. That way, there's no overlap in the behaviors. There's no question as to what a behavior is when they're recording the data. And once we have our question, our subjects, and our behaviors identified, we need to determine what method to use to record the behaviors. So the type of observation method chosen is dependent on the question we are asking. Some observation methods will answer the question better than others, as well as be more feasible given the number of behaviors we're looking for or the subjects in the observation. Focal sampling is one recording method where we are observing one individual for a specified amount of time and recording all instances of their behavior. Usually, this is where we're looking at several different categories of behaviors. And in other words, we're looking at all occurrences of the behaviors being recorded. Scan sampling is a recording method where an individual or group is scanned at regular intervals and the behavior is recorded at that instance. So, usually, this type of method works with only a few simple categories of behavior, and can also be referred to as an interval recording of behavior. And lastly, behavior sampling is a recording method where the observer watches the individual or the whole group of subjects and records each occurrence of a particular behavior. So, this method is often used with rare but significant types of behavior where it is important to record each occurrence. And these rare behaviors would often be missed by the focal or the scan sampling methods that we just talked about. Each observation that we offer to BOT is different and will require different um, levels of training or instruction for them to be able to do the observation. So for some, it's just us providing here's a list of behaviors or here's an instruction of when to call a keeper to have them come observe. If you see something specific, heavy panting or climbing in this area, something like that. For other observations, we have to go further in depth with the descriptions and videos of the behaviors that we're looking for, and the training on those behaviors as well. We'll walk through what our habitat maps look like and point them out in the habitat so we can see what it looks like on paper versus in person. We will also I tend to create these observations, and I usually introduce the project to them, and then we'll go out to the habitat together and I'll do the observation. They can see it be done, but then they also get a chance to practice with me there to help them kind of work through some of the kinks because again, I'm still learning as we create these, and our BOT volunteers are super graceful with me for that. Um, and the volunteers will continue to practice until they get comfortable. It's really important that they are comfortable with the program, the observation, and the behaviors being asked before they're actually collecting data so they can take as much practice as they need in order to do that. And then once they feel like they're comfortable, they're ready to be checked off, we get together and we will actually work to check them off. And so for that, we'll typically do observations at the same time, and then we'll compare our observations to see how they match up. And this is considered what we call inter-observer reliability. So we want to make sure that the data that BOT is collecting is reliable. And so we compare those results. And we usually look at a threshold of about 85% of the same results or same responses to be able to be considered checked off and good to go. So no observation is the same. Each training is different, and each volunteer's ability to progress in our observations is different. So that's up to them, and it's at their own pace. So there's no one way to do this for them. And, we've kind of already talked about this, but our volunteers really play a crucial role in helping us exceed or succeed in our mission at the Phoenix Zoo. Many of our volunteers, they do their work with the zoo by volunteering in guest engagement roles, while in many of our observations, BOT is tied up with those observations and they can't really speak to guests. There are some instances where they can engage with our guests. So with the guests noticing and often asking questions. When it doesn't compromise the observation, having BOT present and able to speak to the guest about the situation and the steps being taken is extremely helpful in communicating with the guests and once again furthering our mission. And when we do have BOT out there that and when they're able to communicate with guests, we always ensure that they have talking points about animal well-being and the animals that they're watching and why they're watching and messaging basically for them to pass on to ensure that our guests are learning and walking away feeling confident that our animals have optimal animal well-being and that we are being leaders in animal care and conservation and inspiring them to care for nature. Our BOT program has been so well received by our animal care staff. And as volunteers, they also have feedback as well. So I asked our BOT volunteers if they had anything that what they thought of our program. And so we've got a few of their quotes up here today. So Carol F. said she absolutely loves this program. She loves the education component for both herself and the curious guests. She said, I think it fully supports the zoo's mission and our endeavor to create the best life for our ambassadors. Guests respond favorably seeing BOT on site, so I think BOT is a great tool on so many levels. Henry H. says, for me, BOT is an enriching program. We support your work in observing each animal's behavior. The animal data collected allows you and the specific animal keepers to use this information to the benefit of the animals in their living environment. Behavior management and health oversight. As a volunteer, I'm happy to participate in the animal observations and I get to know the animals a lot better, understand their behaviors, and hopefully support the improved management of the animals. I find BOT a great learning experience and enjoyable. And lastly, Pat G says, I enjoy the BOT projects because it provides an opportunity to learn so much about the animals. It also provides a feeling that we are doing something to try to improve their daily activities. And I know I feel this way and the staff feel this way, but we're just really thankful for BOT and their assistance to providing the best care possible for our animals. So thank you, BOT. We've talked a lot about BOT and the work that they do, but sometimes the projects that we have, BOT can't assist us with. And for those projects, they may be done in places where or situations not easily accessible to our volunteers, or they could be done at times when our volunteers cannot be on grounds, or even staff aren't on grounds to do observations. So in those cases, we'll actually oftentimes use cameras to capture behavior we otherwise wouldn't be able to see. In our case, we're mostly limited to using trail cameras, which if you've ever used trail cameras, you know that they can be a little challenging. They have limited view, and like any other camera, if that behavior occurs out of that view, we may not know it's occurring. And then if you combine that with the battery life and the sensitivity or sensor levels for what triggers the camera to go, we may not be getting a full account of the behavior when we are present. But this gives us more than we had before. So it is a tool that we use. And with that, our keepers will spend a lot of time observing their animals and have to review a lot of projects. I think in one of our projects, we've had over 800 videos in a single night, and that was just on one camera that we had running, and we had multiple cameras, and these are 15 to 20-second videos. So our keepers don't physically have the time to be able to go through all of those videos in a single night, put the cameras up the next night, and then do comparisons day by day. So our keepers, they spend a lot of time observing them, and they have extra time for projects, but they don't have that amount of time to dedicate to the number of videos that we're sometimes seeing. So in seeing a need for this, we created a different volunteer position. And this position is similar to BOT. It's meant to help us observe our animals, but it's just doing so through videos. And because of that, we've named it Bot Video Review. Our bot video review volunteers assist animal care staff by reviewing video footage obtained by the trail cameras, acting as a first set of eyes to help filter through all the videos to find those that are more pertinent to what our staff are looking for. So the volunteers are trained to look for specific behaviors or situations. And when they see that, they will flag the video so staff can go through and just look at those particular videos. So this eliminates all that time that our staff would have to be dedicating to reviewing all the videos. And now they can just focus on a certain sum. And that's been really helpful. Since we have our volunteers reviewing the video footage and we need it done on a consistent basis, we've actually found that this is a unique position that can actually be done from the comfort of our volunteers' homes. So that's right. This is a work from home position for our volunteers. Of course, they could come in if we have computers available and they could do it in person, but many of our volunteers choose to do it from home. It's a lot easier. It can be more comfortable for them, and they can do it really whenever. And it also helps them get out of the heat, which I don't know if you guys know, but Phoenix is a little warm. So for those projects, we have our video review volunteers assist with. We have the staff set up the trail camera. They get all the videos on an SD card, and they upload those videos to SharePoint. So we use Microsoft SharePoint for this. And our volunteers are given access to SharePoint, and they're able to view the videos on their own computers. And because of this, they work independently. I don't even typically meet these volunteers in person to get them trained up. They work purely off of written instruction. So they do need to be able to have access to a computer, have reliable internet, preferably have speakers or some way to listen to sound, and they need to be comfortable navigating through this technology on their own. You don't need to have a Microsoft account to access SharePoint, but they should just be able to follow the link that I provide them. We've had a few issues with this, but not too many, so it's really worked out well for us as well. And then they're just able to track their hours, and they communicate that to our volunteer coordinator staff, and then that way they get their hours for it as well. So this is a screenshot or an example of what they're looking at when they enter into SharePoint. This is from our sloth project, specifically April and April 16th through the 20th. You can kind of see the labels up there. So we normally organize these projects by the files and the videos are all organized by projects and then broken down into time, and we'll label them if they've been completed or not, so our volunteers know which ones they need to go into or not go into, and so that way they know where to direct their attention. You'll see that they have the file name on the left, when it was modified, so we know when it was viewed. If it's been viewed, it says yes, so that means that a volunteer has already gone and looked at it. If it says no, like down at the bottom, it means that a volunteer still needs to go look at it. And then the next column, it says animal staff review needed. They can put no or leave it blank if staff don't need to, and if they do need to, it flags it red when they put yes, and then they're able to provide comments next to that to show what exactly why we need to look at this video, and then we can also see who reviewed it in order to ask questions or follow up if we need to. So we've kind of already talked about this, but trail cameras do have their limitations, and we can't see everything we hope to see. Sometimes the sensitivity levels or the battery levels or just the limited view is not allowing us to see everything, but this is seeing way more than we previously saw. So it's been amazing for us. It's allowed us to see and determine like what's going on overnight, especially when we're not here. So that's been great. And then with SharePoint working and having volunteers working on their own computers, we do sometimes run into technology issues, but really not too much. So overall, this has been a very successful program. Very quickly, just some of the projects we've worked on. We've had the hyenas who started with us in our predator passage habitat. They joined us, and so we wanted to see, they joined us right at the beginning of our busy season. So we wanted to see how they were doing overnight and what they were doing overnight. So we were able to collect videos for that, and our volunteers helped us go through and look at that. We've also had our volunteers assist us with a sloth project. We wanted to see his activity, when he was active at night and how active, and all of that. So they were able to assist us with this project as well. And then our jaguar project, they've been able to assist us with, because looking for a very specific behavior that keepers had only ever seen evidence of, but never actually seen the behavior really. And we didn't know the prevalence of that behavior or how often it happened or patterns. So our volunteers help us reviewing this footage to see that. And just like with BOT, I asked them to provide feedback. I'm not going to go through it, but this is the feedback that they have really in general. They just love the flexibility and working from home and really supporting the zoo's mission. So other than that, I've talked a lot about BOT and our BOT video review volunteers, but I'd like to open it up for questions. If you have any, a huge thank you to all of our volunteers and our volunteer program here at the zoo for being so supportive. And just thank you for having me here today as well to talk to you guys about it.
Thank you, Danielle. That was really informative and wonderful, and the program is amazing. So thank you. We have time, I think, just for one question, and we thank you for spending your morning with us. We had a question about how many volunteers you actually have in the bot program, and what is
Yeah.
the minimal amount of training that they need to participate once they're a full-fledged volunteer?
Yeah. So I think right now on my roster for BOT, I have around 32 or 33 volunteers. And that number holds us over pretty well. We sometimes have observations that pop up, especially in the summer when it's so warm. A lot of our volunteers aren't here in the summer. So if our observations pop up, we might have some gaps in the time slots when volunteers could typically observe, but they're not able to. So I think even if we could have a little more than that, that would be a good number. But so far, the around that 30 range has worked out well for us. And then as far as training, it really just depends on the observation that we're doing. So I'm not looking for anybody specifically that has all this time, or I should say, not has all this experience with observing animals. I'm mainly looking for volunteers who are flexible, open minded, and are easily can listen to directions, because I might tell them to do something on one observation over here, and then I might do a complete 180 and say, okay, now you have to do it a whole other different way over here. So they just need to be able to be flexible and work with that.
Thank you, Danielle, and we really appreciate you spending your time with us. It was very informative. We learned a lot, and that is really a wonderful program that you have. So thank you.
Yes,
Let's all
thank
give
you.
Danielle a hand. I think we all learned a lot this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Right. We have lots of compliments in the chat, Danielle, so thank you. And we are we are